Tax reform and the health care overhaul are making headlines. CNBC senior contributor Larry Kudlow will analyze. And is a new dark ages upon us? Author Rod Dreher believes it is, and he's written a survival guide, The Benedict Option, which people are discussing from coast to coast. And finally, what city is more synonymous with St. Patrick's Day than New York? Authors of Sons of St. Patrick, George Marlin and Brad MINER are here to talk the history of Big Apple Catholicism through its archbishops the world over. Begins right now.
Now, from Washington, D.C., Raymond Arroyo.
A warm welcome to all of you joining us in the United States and the world over, and happy St. Patrick's Day. Larry Kudlow, Rod Dreher, and Brad MINER and George Marlin are all straight ahead. What a show. If you'd like to comment on tonight's program, send me a tweet. I'm at Raymond Arroyo. I'll be live tweeting throughout the show, or you can email us at worldover@ewtn.com. Let's get started. Here's the brief. News from the world over this week. As Capitol Hill begins to tackle the American Health Care Act, President Donald Trump on Thursday submitted his federal budget proposal for the upcoming fiscal year. As expected, billions in deep cuts are being proposed in several domestic and foreign programs, as defense spending would increase by the same amount. The Environmental Protection Agency took a big hit as the president is seeking to slash a quarter of its budget. State Department spending could also be cut by 1/3. Cuts to the State Department and other foreign aid programs would total more than $20 billion. Other agencies would also see across-the-board cuts, and the United States' financial commitments to the United Nations would be cut in half under Trump's budget. In all, President Trump is proposing that more than $50 billion in discretionary spending be shifted from various programs to defense spending. The president commented on the budget proposal on Wednesday.
We are proposing a budget that will shrink the bloated federal bureaucracy, and I mean bloated, while protecting our national security. You see what we're doing with our military. Bigger, better, stronger than ever before. You see what's happening?
Entitlement programs, including Social Security and Medicare, are not a part of this budget. During his presidential campaign, the president vowed to protect those programs. And President Trump might want to fast-track his plans for education reform. This week, New York State scrapped literacy standards for those trying to become public school teachers. The concern? Too many applicants were failing the test, and disproportionately. They were black or Hispanic. Leslie Sudak, who served on the task force for examining the state's teacher certification tests, said having a predominantly white workforce really doesn't match our student body. Some critics have claimed the exam was racist, but in 2015, a federal judge ruled that the test was not discriminatory. And as British Prime Minister Theresa May begins the process of withdrawal from the European Union, Scotland could soon vote on independence. Scottish First Minister Nicola Sturgeon said she'll seek a second independence referendum in light of Brexit. Scots overwhelmingly rejected the referendum to leave the EU, and according to polls, they are not interested in another vote for Scottish independence. May decried the new push by the Scottish National Party, insisting that this is not a moment to play politics or create uncertainty and division.
This will be a defining moment for our whole country as we begin to forge a new relationship with Europe and a new role for ourselves in the world. We will be a strong, self-governing global Britain.
And a new study is projecting that secularism is on a worldwide decline. The culprit? Contraception. According to the Evolutionary Psychological Science Journal, since the 19th century, those who are non-religious have been more likely to use contraception, a trend that continued into the 21st century, according to the study. The more religious a person is, the more likely they are to have more children. As a result, secularism is headed for a demographic winter. The use of contraception is diminishing the representation of secularists in each successive generation. Meanwhile, according to the researchers, the number of religiously minded individuals could continue to grow. We'll see. And according to another study published this week, there is a good reason for having children: longer life. Researchers in Sweden have found that the average life expectancy of 60-year-olds who have children was 2 more years for men and 1.5 years for women, compared to peers with no children. By age 80, fathers and mothers could expect to live about 10% longer, maybe an additional year or more. The study, published in the Journal of Epidemiology and Community Health, stopped short of concluding that having children is the cause of the life expectancy gains. It merely pointed out the correlation. And some church news: plans are officially underway for Pope Francis to visit Colombia in September. The announcement was made in Bogota this past week. The Pope will spend nearly a week in the South American nation, arriving in Bogota on September 6th and visiting 3 other cities before returning to Rome on September 11th. The visit, in the works for 2 years, has been delayed by the Colombian peace process. It is the first papal trip to Colombia in over 3 decades. Also in the news this week, Pope Francis says he's willing to consider the question of admitting married men to the priesthood to help alleviate the worldwide shortage of priests, at least in some cases. In a recent interview with a German newspaper, Francis mentioned the possibility of ordaining married men of proven virtue in remote areas of the world where priests are scarce. Initially, however, Francis dismissed the idea of voluntary celibacy, saying that it was not a solution to the shortage of priests. Clerical celibacy is a discipline in the Latin Rite that could be changed by any pope. The possibility of married priests is not new. Both St. John Paul and Benedict XVI broached the subject during their pontificates. When asked if this was the right moment to relax or abolish priestly celibacy, Francis answered that discernment is needed to see what the Holy Spirit desires. We'll keep you posted. And speaking of making changes, it has been found that Pope Francis did not alter the 10 Commandments. Found. Several news organizations, including the Associated Press, went to the trouble of debunking what has become a widely circulated story that Francis lifted prohibitions on adultery and added commandments banning genetic engineering and self-glorification. The original report asserted that Pope Francis made the announcement during his 2015 visit to Ecuador, and went so far as to say that the Vatican was having the new set of commandments etched in marble. Vatican spokesman Greg Burke called the story absurd, saying these kinds of stories don't merit any action on our part because they're so far-fetched. Fake news. When we return, House Republicans are planning to repeal and replace Obamacare, but will their proposed bill do that? CNBC's Larry Kudlow is here with analysis when the world over continues. Stay right there.
Sign. And that will be a bill where everybody's going to get into the room and we're going to get it done. We'll get rid of Obamacare and make health care better for you and for your family.
Welcome back to The World Over. That was President Trump at a Make America Great Again rally in Nashville, Tennessee, speaking about repealing and replacing Obamacare. Now, the House Republicans say they have a plan to do just that, but not all House and Senate Republicans are on board. How would this proposal affect Americans' health care costs? Here with analysis is CNBC senior contributor Larry Kudlow. Larry, thanks for being with us.
Thank you, Raymond. Appreciate it.
Your reaction to these Trump rallies we're seeing around the country, he's obviously trying to whip up support for health care. Effective?
Oh, I think it will be. Depends on how much of this he's going to do, but there's no better salesman, no better marketing guy than Donald Trump, and people will flock to hear him. So I think it's a good thing. And by the way, my quick take, I mean, perhaps we'll go into this. I think the Paul Ryan health care in the House is a very good beginning. It can be amended, it can be changed, and I'm sure it will go through some iterations. But basically, the good should never be the enemy of the perfect. We're getting rid of the mandates, which is what destroyed the health system to begin with. We're cutting 13 taxes. It's a pro-growth bill. It's a pro-health care bill. And we're going to really add a lot of choice, a lot of competition, health savings accounts, crossing state lines. These are things Republicans have talked about for years. And again, I think there'll be some amendments. But basically, I think they're off to a great start.
Well, I want to get into the nuances of that in a moment. But before I do that, Rachel Maddow had this burning exclusive this week where she got a copy of Donald Trump's, I think it was his 2005 tax return. And it showed that he paid 25% at a 25% rate, $30 million in taxes. He declared $150 million in losses. Does this speak to his brilliance as a businessman, or does it just show that, here's a guy who's just doing what he can do within the law?
I think it mostly speaks to Rachel Maddow's bad production that she had last night. I mean, I guess she thought it was going to be a scandalous. He didn't pay any taxes in 2005. David K. Johnson, whom I know rather well, is a former New York Times reporter. Somebody gave him the 2005 returns. I mean, so, there. Trump pays, what did he pay? $35 million in taxes? Is that enough? You want to pay more than that? Fine. Let's all pay $35 million in taxes. But, liberals, you make your bed, you got a lot of sleep in it. I don't know. I loved it. I tweeted that I loved it, and I got hundreds of tweets back that other people loved it. That's all I know.
Okay, let's dive into health care. As you said earlier, the mandate is gone. This was the big, bugaboo that everybody wanted out of there. But how do you keep healthy people in the system, Larry Kudlow, to cover those who are ill or infirm or need major care? You've got to keep young people in that insurance system, or it doesn't make sense financially.
Well, this is a very important point, absolute important point, maybe a key point. So you get rid of the mandates, and young people, they haven't been buying it anyway. Right. So the whole system cratered, and we were in a financial spiral downwards. Now, look, here's what you need to do. You've got to take the sick and the ill out of the private exchanges. You've got to take them out. And the way you do that, in my opinion, America is a very generous country. And I think the federal government should guarantee the subsidy, they will subsidize the sick and the ill, a guarantee that they will have the means to go into a risk pool, an insurance risk pool, where the costs will be shared. I think, we're not giving them the insurance, but we are paying for them. And I think we should do that. Now, Ryan has this on a state level. I think it's probably going to need to go on a federal level. Now, hear me out. This is how important this is. 5% of the population, the sick and the ill, really cost 50% of the health costs in this country. That's why it's such a difficult problem. Now, if you take them out of the private exchange system, all right? Take them out, because Uncle Sam is going to finance their subsidies and their risk pool. Then you will see a massive drop in insurance premiums. I'm talking massive drop. And in that case, I believe you'll see a whole lot of people sign up. By the way, the deductibles will also come down as the premiums come down. The insurance companies will be able to do that. And I want to make this last point. Under that scenario that I'm giving you, the government subsidizes the risk pool for the sick and the elderly. America is a generous place, and we can afford to do this, and we must do this. Then you will trigger a complete reversal of what the CBO, the Congressional Budget Office, said. They said, 24 million people will not have health insurance.
Additional people.
Actually, if we do this right, additional people. If we do this right, with the risk pools and so forth, you may find that millions and millions of younger people actually sign up for an insurance plan of their choice, one that fits their needs, which you couldn't do under the Obama mandates. So this could be a totally different story if we play our cards right in helping the sick, okay, and then let free market competition with insurance companies take its course. You may see tons and tons of younger people come in and purchase an insurance plan on an exchange that fits their needs.
So Larry Kudlow is saying it is a conservative thing to subsidize people's health care and to charge a 30% surcharge to those who let their coverage lapse, the young people. Is that conservative, Larry Kudlow?
No. Wait, I didn't. No. You missed. I didn't mention the 30% surcharge.
Okay.
I think that 30% surcharge on late enrollees should be scrapped.
Okay.
That's a K Street giveaway to insurance
companies.
No. That must go. Actually, get out of that. No. I'm saying something much different. Raymond, come on, quote me now. I'm saying that America, it's not about conservative or liberal. It's not about conservative or liberal. America is a Christian nation. It is a generous nation. It's a Judeo-Christian nation, what have you.
And Trump promised
to take care of our sick.
Yeah, he promised to cover those who with pre-existing conditions, so he's got to make good on it somehow.
He did.
I want to play this for you.
He absolutely did. I'm just explaining to you the way to do this.
Members of the House Freedom Caucus, as well as GOP senators, have made it clear they will not vote for the Paul Ryan plan. Senator Rand Paul had this to say on Face the Nation.
If we get what we've got from Ryan, Obamacare Light, he will not have the votes, and we have to get to that point before true negotiations begin. Right now, I think there's a charm offensive going on. Everybody's being nice to everybody because they want us to vote for this, but we're not going to vote for it.
Larry Kudlow, how do you get around these opponents, some of them very conservative members of the president's base?
You've got people on the left, on the right, the moderates. Look, here's my generic solution, Raymond. The Republican Party must practice bipartisanship with itself, okay? Bipartisanship with itself. They have to be open to amendments. I mean, I think, for example, my friends in the Conservative Freedom Caucus, they're making a lot of important points with respect to insurance regulations, with respect to tax credits and so forth and so on, which I'd like to pursue with you. Some people, maybe the biggest cutting-edge problem is going to be Medicaid.
Right.
Freedom Caucus would like Medicaid to be capped a year or two earlier. Some people on the Senate side don't want that. These are solvable problems. You always have, this is the way the sausage is made in Washington. These are very solvable problems. President Trump himself has been working with House leaders and advising those leaders to listen and let the Freedom Caucus have some things, put it in the bill, or at least be able to vote for amendments. And I think the same will be true in the Senate. At the end of the day, I'm optimistic. This is such an important thing. Not only is this about providing America with first-rate health care and opening the door for access to everybody. Not only that, it's also a pro-growth bill because it repeals 13 tax hikes. That's very, very important. It's also a limited government bill. It's a limited government bill that will stop the march towards single-payer, government-dominated health care, which we were very close to with Obamacare. And I think these are all Republican issues. I'm sorry the Democrats are not working with Republicans. Some of those Democrats ought to work with Republicans, in my view. But whatever. If the GOP can have a bipartisan practice with itself and listen to all the views and allow the extra votes and be willing to make some changes to the original Ryan bill, I think it's going to come out just fine. I'm very optimistic about this.
Larry Kudlow, what would you say to those who are suggesting that the president is risking his presidency by embracing a flawed health care bill? Laura Ingraham says it's a trap being set for President Trump. Senator Tom Cotton says he wants passage delayed. What's the rush? You would say what?
Well, look, I don't think it's a trap at all. I think if this thing is done right, and I believe it will be, and I believe President Trump will be very involved in this, it's going to be a big plus. Now, let me say a couple things here. I would have preferred tax cuts first. And in fact, I would have preferred the business tax cuts for large and small companies.
Now, why?
I would have preferred that to come first. Well, number one, it's simpler, and I think would have very, very, very broad support. Number two, it would start the economic kicker that we need sooner. I don't want to wait till the fall.
Yeah,
or certainly
McConnell's
not next year. Okay?
McConnell's saying you're not going to get anything till after the August recess on taxes.
Right. Well, they take too many recesses. They take too many recesses over there. I don't know. I don't take any recesses.
Me neither.
But, if that's what McConnell says, you know, he's the leader. So, to me, that risks postponing economic activity and investment that we need, and it may risk the stock market as well. So my first choice would have been tax cuts, okay? Unfortunately, I'm losing that battle, although I'm still arguing, along with Steve Moore and Steve Forbes and Art Laffer, you could take the business tax cuts and still graft that on to a health care reconciliation bill. This is technically doable. I'm trying to sell this. I can't report that I'm having much luck. To your other point, though, this is really important.
Yeah.
You're talking politics here. President Trump needs W's, right? Wins. W's on the two major issues that begin his presidency. One is health care reform, and two is tax reform. He must win both of those. 35 some odd years ago, I was Reagan's budget deputy, one of his budget deputies, and his key was the tax cut first. And everything was focused on getting his across-the-board tax cuts. And he got them. He won. And that W gave him enormous political capital for the remainder of his term. I think President Trump must get W's on tax reform and health reform. And I think it can be done, by the way, but the political stakes are very high. I'll grant you that.
Yeah. What do you make of the promise from the congressional leaders that this is a three-phase process, this health care plan? I mean, you mentioned earlier your competition between states for insurance. Well, that's not in this bill. They're claiming that'll have to be second stage or third stage. Is this a chimera? I mean, we've both been around here a long time, Larry. When you start hearing that's part of the second phase, I start to worry.
Well, no. You have to understand. We all want competition across state lines. Everybody wants that, and I want to raise another issue or two about the so-called stage 2 and stage 3. But because of Senate rules, it's not likely that you can do that. Right? The Senate, you can't go into reconciliation. The Senate will want a 60 person vote on that, 60 majority vote. So I don't know. Now, there are other people who believe some of these rules can be put into the reconciliation package. Other people, and I'm kind of in this camp myself, think that what you really need is a new Senate parliamentarian so we can max out on reconciliation. That's one of my thoughts. That's how we could still do tax reform, by the way. You need a good Senate parliamentarian. There's a Democrat in there now. Let's have a Republican. Okay? Look, you got to play hardball. This is a hardball game. But these ideas of, let's say, regulations regarding insurance companies, certain regulations have to be met. HHS, Tom Price is the secretary, he'll go as far as he can go before he hits a legislative wall. Look, we have separation of powers in our country. But I think other things may be a little easier to get done a little sooner. But I don't doubt the motives of Paul Ryan or Tom Price or Mitch McConnell. I think they're all behind that. There are disagreements on Medicaid. Look, I have another disagreement, okay? There are tax credits, some refundable, some are just flat tax credits.
Right.
I think the bill should be amended. I want the bill to be amended so we are more generous to the lower end and less generous to the high end, okay? I don't think people who make $150,000 a year should get a tax credit.
Yeah.
They can afford it themselves. If they work for a company, they get it there. Most people will get it at their business. If not, the way this bill is going to be reformed, it will be much more affordable. I would get to people who are at the poverty line or above the poverty line, just above it. So I would use refundable tax credits. I would use them for people earning more like up to $40,000, $50,000, $60,000 a year. Those are the working class folks, many of whom have been shafted in the last 15 years. So I want to be more generous at the low end and less generous at the high end. I'd like to see that. And the point you made earlier, I really hope we clarify this. The insurance companies should not be able to get a 30% surcharge on late enrollees. That's nonsense. That's a lot like Obamacare's mandates.
Well, that's
I don't
their
know
attempt.
how that got in. It should be abolished.
That's their attempt to keep young, healthy people in the insurance system. It's just, but it only lasts for a year, and it's just, as you said, it's a boondoggle to the insurance company. Final question: how long do you think it will take to pass this so-called repeal and replace, or some health care bill, whether it's this one or a vastly altered one? How long, Larry?
I think there'll be a reconciliation vote. Let's see. We're in almost mid-March. I think you'll have a reconciliation vote by May, at the latest June. But I have no doubt an excellent package is going to go through. Like I say, I'm an optimist on this, and President Trump needs a W, and he'll work hard. You said, he's in Tennessee today. He's going to Kentucky. He's going to have rallies. He's going to stir up his folks. This is good. He's a great salesman. So I'm kind of optimistic about this. I just wish we could have the tax cuts in there alongside health care.
I kind of noticed that during our conversation, Larry. Thank you for being with us. We'll talk to you soon. Thanks again. When we return, how can traditional Christians regroup against secularization and take back the culture? Author of The Benedict Option, Rod Dreher, weighs in when The World Over Live returns in a moment. Stay right there.
Now, once again, Raymond Arroyo.
Welcome back to The World Over. My next guest believes we are on the precipice of a dark age, certainly a post-Christian era. He's the senior editor at the American Conservative and author of the new book, The Benedict Option, A Strategy for Christians in a Post-Christian Nation. Welcome back to the program, Rod Dreher. Rod, great to have you back.
Raymond, it's a pleasure.
Now, let's break down what this Benedict Option is. You've been writing about this for a long time. It's the first time it's in a hardbound book. Break down the principles of Saint Benedict's rule that you found so appealing and that you believe people can profit from in what they're encountering in this world that we all occupy.
Well, I take Pope Benedict XVI seriously when he said that we in the West are facing a spiritual crisis worse than any since the fall of the Roman Empire. Well, Benedict of Nursia, Saint Benedict, came out of Rome, the city of Rome, because he could not stand to live in all that moral chaos and decadence. And he said, Lord, what shall I do? What do you want me to do? He founded the Benedictine order, not because he wanted to make the empire great again, but because he wanted to serve the Lord in a time of great chaos. And what he did, without even knowing what he was doing, was lay the groundwork for the next few centuries for the rebirth of civilization in the West. His monks went out into Western Europe in a time of great material deprivation. They evangelized, they taught the people how to pray, and they spread the faith. And what I tried to do in this book is to say, what would St. Benedict today, if he were to come back to us today, what would he have to say to us, we who are not meant to be monks or nuns, but who are ordinary people, moms, dads, living in the world? How can we be faithful to the Lord in this time of great darkness?
And there's some principles that you enunciate in the book. Order, prayer, asceticism, community, stability. The question is this, and I spoke to some priests this morning, as a matter of fact, as I was traveling around, and they made the suggestion that Saint Benedict, in writing his rule, he wrote that rule to sort of homogenize monasticism in the world because there were so many different groups living in different ways. How is this applicable? Saint Benedict, saw himself and his community as a part of the church, not the whole church. They weren't asking the laity to come behind the walls and lock themselves in. They did that as monastics, as religious, as intellectuals trying to preserve the church's deposit of faith. How is that applicable to us today in the West as lay people meant to go out and change and reshape that culture and that world?
Right. Well, the Benedictines can do what they did because they had intense formation behind the monastery walls, and still do. When I was in Norcia at the Benedictine monastery there, I was talking to the monks, Father Cassian Folsom and other monks, saying, how does this apply to the laity? And we're not called to be monks, we're called to be in the world, but the way they've ordered their lives around strong discipleship, prayer, fasting, scripture study, and so on, forms their hearts so that when they go out into the world, when they interact with the world, with pilgrims who come there, they can be Christ for the world. Similarly for us, we who are working in the world, whether it's in journalism, law, academia, wherever, if we are going to be faithful to Christ as a witness to the world and to evangelize the world, we have got to have much stronger formation than we do today.
Rod, in the Benedict option, you really do, I would argue, you make the case that the Benedictines really are an ideal that we can take some cues from. But you know, in my own study, and again, this could be limited, but in my own study of the Desert Fathers, monasticism in general, those church fathers, those monastics went out to confront the demons within and the demons without in the desert, hidden away place. Your Benedict option really is not about confronting so much as withdrawing. At what point do you confront the culture that you rightly so deplore?
See, this is, I think, a common misconception about the Benedict option. I argue that we have to withdraw in a limited way from the world so that when we go out into the world, we are formed as strong, well-discipled Christians so we can transform the world. It's not an either-or. I think, for example, that we need to make our homes into domestic monasteries in the sense that we have to keep the media out of our home unrestricted, you know, with smartphones and things like something as simple as that.
Television, I mean, you talk in the book about withdrawing from television, keeping the kids off the cell phones, the dangers of pornography and other things. What about the pop culture at large?
Yeah, my children, I have 3 children, and they are not isolated in a bubble, hermetically sealed bubble. I lead them, and their mother leads them by the hand to show them this is the world, this is the good in the world. It's even outside the Christian community. God made the world, and He wants us to partake of this goodness. But if you're going to have the kind of discernment you need to celebrate what is good and true and beautiful and reject the other, you have to be well-formed in your education, in your prayer life, in your parish life, and all kinds of things. So this is temporary or strategic withdrawal for deeper formation and contemplation so we can go out and be Christ for the world and learn how to suffer, Raymond, because that's part of the problem with the church in the West. We have forgotten how to suffer.
We'll get to that in a moment because there's a key moment in the latter part of the book that I want to call your attention to. But before I do that, David Brooks, the New York Times columnist, wrote a lengthy piece on your book, which is a nice thing. What he had to say wasn't always so nice. I want you to respond to this. He writes, "My big problem with Rod is he answers secular purism with religious purism. By retreating to neat, homogeneous monocultures, most separatists will end up doing what all self-segregationalists do, fostering narrowness, prejudice, and moral arrogance. They will close off the dynamic creativity of a living faith." What he means there, I think, is that in that clash of faith and the secularity comes something that is important, a spark that revivifies, regenerates a culture. Are you denying people that clash through this withdrawal by taking all the faithful people and basically, you know, saying, pull back and go to the woods for your own sakes and to save your children?
Yeah. But that's just it. I'm not saying that. This is a common misreading of the Benedict option. I don't say head for the hills. If people feel called to go live an agrarian life or something, good for them, but that's not what I'm called to do, and that's not what most Christians are called to do. What I think we have to have communities that are porous, somewhat porous, so we can keep from getting crazy. I write in the book about certain communities that have struggled with this, with the abuse of authority if they try to separate too much. I interviewed a young woman who had been raised Catholic. She's an atheist now, and so are her older brothers and sisters.
Why?
Because her parents were so fearful. They retreated out to a rural area to make sure their children their purity was not damaged by the world. They made their kids crazy, and they made the face of the church they showed to the children was one of fear and, in fact, terror. And that is not what I'm calling for. That's one way that we as the church can help keep each other accountable. You know?
There is in reading the book, and you bring in a lot of historical antecedents. You talk about the Czech Republic. I mean, Italy. You bring in various examples of how the principles can be utilized and implemented in a practical way. At the same time, it is, Rod, a dark reading of the culture and the moment we're in now. And you write the following. You say, peering into the near future, the world of work looks uncertain for everyone, especially for Christians. The practical challenge facing us are unlike any that most believers in this country have ever dealt with. Schools and colleges, morally, spiritually, and vocationally, will have to prepare young believers for some increasingly harsh realities. And you write about this many times in the book, that Christians have to get used to the notion that you're going to be marginalized, you're not going to be able to find work. Is that a real... Do you really believe that? I mean, in the time when we have a Neil Gorsuch going to the Supreme Court, when you've got directors and actors and screenwriters and novelists and writers like yourself, guy on the New York Times bestseller list, how is this marginalization and a quieting and shushing of a faithful impulse?
If you talk to law professors who study religious liberty, if you talk to people in the medical profession who see what's coming, if you talk to people in education and academia, it's all going in the same place. If you dissent from what the culture has come to believe about gay rights, that's the tip of the spear. It's not only about gay rights, but that is the point on which that the activists are trying to take away the religious liberty of the church and of Christian institutions. It's coming. It's just not a time to panic, but it is a time to prepare for it. What is going to happen when we are asked to compromise our faith just for the sake of keeping our jobs? Just burn a little pinch of incense to Caesar. It'll be okay. These times are coming, and you can look at the culture, especially at the young people, the millennial generation. They have almost completely, even within the church, thrown aside what the church teaches and what the Bible teaches about the meaning of sex and sexuality. This is going to have a political effect. If people think that voting for Donald Trump is going to save us, yeah, maybe it has bought us a time of reprieve, but even if Donald Trump were a saint, he could not turn back this tide of secularization and of eroticization of the culture that has been building for centuries. I'm just telling people, get ready, it's coming. We have got to train our kids to be Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, the three faithful Hebrews in the book of Daniel, who they worked for the state, they worked for the king, but when they were put to the test and told to bow before the idol, they said, you can kill us before we'll apostatize. We may not come to that in our country. I hope, God, we don't in our lifetime, but we could die a death of the faith by 1,000 cuts. And I'm just saying that we have to prepare for this day. We have to raise ourselves and train ourselves to make the right choice when we're put to the test.
What do you hope will be the reaction from people reading this book? And I'm not talking about Christians reading the book. I'm talking about the wider world, the secular world who perhaps have never considered these ideas. What are you hearing from them, and what do you hope their reaction will be?
You know, I have to tell you, Raymond, I have a friend who works in New York journalism who was telling me just yesterday, he said, you would be surprised at how many secular liberal people are interested in the idea of the Benedict option, because even though they're not Christians or maybe don't take Christianity that seriously, they feel that the wheels are coming off in this society, that something dark is coming, something chaotic is coming, and they themselves long for community and a sense of stability within which to embed themselves for the sake of living a moral life. And I hope that they will read this. I hope they'll convert. I hope that they will come to Christ, because I believe Christ is true. What he said is true, and he is the Savior of the world. But even if they don't do that, I hope they can at least respect where we Christians come from and give us the room to be faithful. And I hope that Christians who read this, Raymond, will wake up and realize the signs of the times. Pope Benedict said it himself. He said that we are going into a dark time, but the church that will survive is the church of the really convinced, who will live out the faith with joy, not with anger and fear, but with joy, and serve Christ and serve the world. And from that mustard seed, real renewal will come.
Before I let you go, many say, look, this book might have had more resonance if Donald Trump hadn't been elected, because there really was a sense of hopelessness not only in the culture at large, but in the body politic, for people who do believe, who felt their religious views were being under attack, and their deeply held beliefs and values. Has that math changed at all, in your opinion? Now I'm asking you to put on your political hat.
Oh, no.
With the election of Donald Trump.
You're right. I wrote this book assuming that Hillary Clinton would be elected, and we knew what that would mean for religious liberty. It would be under even worse attack. God had other plans, and I think that, you know, I can certainly understand why Christians afraid of religious liberty's loss would vote for Trump. But look what we have now. I mean, I'm excited Neil Gorsuch has been nominated, but Trump hasn't issued a religious liberty executive order that we all hoped he would. And so I'm skeptical about what he can do. But even if Trump does everything we religious conservatives want him to do, it's not going to turn the culture around, and it's the culture that we as believers have got to pay closer attention to. It's not about politics, it's about culture.
And you turn that around how, in 30 seconds? How do you turn the culture around?
Well, it starts in our own families, it starts in our own parishes. In Dante's Purgatorio, Dante the Pilgrim was told, you want to turn things around? Start in your own heart. Start with repenting in your own heart, spread out to the family, to the parish, and then trust God. God will renew the world in his own time, but he can only do it if we're faithful.
Rod Dreher, thanks for being here. The book is The Benedict Option, A Strategy for Christians in a Post-Christian Nation by Rod Dreher. It's available online and at bookstores everywhere. When we return, we'll take a look at the rich history of the Irish Catholic Archbishops of New York, the illustrious and the not so, with the authors of Sons of St. Patrick. Brad Miner and George Marlin are right here. The World Over continues in a moment. Stay right tuned.
I've always loved New York. I'm a kid from Baldwin, Missouri, and I haven't been in New York very often. I'm going to need help to find my way in from LaGuardia and Kennedy, but just to walk these streets and to visit these churches and to see the museums and to meet the people. I realized, too, the Cardinal was telling me how expansive the Archdiocese is, that it's not just Staten Island and Manhattan. We go up through the Bronx, and then we go way up north, and he said we got some beautiful rural and country areas. There's the map there. So it's a real icon. It's a real kind of a snapshot of the Church Universal and the Catholic Church in the United States. So just to dig in and get to know New York, that's going to be a lot of fun.
That was Cardinal Timothy Dolan, of course. Welcome back to The World Over. This week marks St. Patrick's Day, and my next guests have written the perfect book for this occasion, Sons of St. Patrick. It takes an in-depth look at all 10 of the archbishops of America's premier Catholic diocese. Here to discuss the book, that is so big it took 2 of them to write it, is the chairman of Aid to the Church in Need USA, George Marlin, and returning to the program, senior fellow at the Faith and Reason Institute, Brad Miner. Thank you both for being here.
Raymond, thank you.
Chance, George, my arm's not that long, but I'll wave to you. Yeah, oh, I know his is. He could reach me in Poughkeepsie from here. Let's start with why you all decided to write this really reference compendium. It's the story of the 10 men who cast a shadow over New York and really remade the Catholic Church in America. Why tell this story, and how did this partnership come to be?
Well, I think what happened is 2 things. First, I've had the privilege of knowing the 4 most recent archbishops of New York. Worked closely with Cook. O'Connor and I are very good friends, but we worked on the culture war battles in New York City. When I was the executive director of the Port Authority in New York and New Jersey, I worked with the Cardinal on a couple of things back then also. But so that experience and that knowledge of seeing the impact the Archbishop can have, Brad and I sort of kicked this around. We went to Dolan. He opened the archives to us. And so we were the first ones really to see not all the archives, but most of the archives. So that was the germ that got this cooking, and the rest is history.
And how long did you spend in those archives, Brad?
The better part of 3 years.
Wow.
Yeah, and part of that is I especially was focused on the 19th century and even before that. And those documents are almost all handwritten. And some of it's fading a bit, some of the handwriting, because most of it's drafts, because the final documents would have been sent off to somebody. So we're working with draft documents, and it's hard to decipher them.
Tell me how this role, the role of the Cardinal Archbishop, mostly Cardinal Archbishops of New York, how did this role evolve? And do you see any connection in the Irish heritage and lineage of all the men to hold this position? Anything lingering that you see?
Why don't you start with Hughes and we'll work forward.
Well, of course, the very first of the archbishops, John Joseph Hughes, became archbishop in 1850 when New York stopped being mission territory and became, in fact, an archdiocese. He was born in Ireland, as was John Murphy Farley, the fourth archbishop. The role has changed a great deal, but they've all either had birth in Ireland, as those two I mentioned, or their parents or their grandparents were born in Ireland. So every one of them is, in that sense, a son of St. Patrick. Plus, each has been situated one way or another at St. Patrick's Cathedral, either St. Patrick's Old Cathedral,
right downtown,
which is now a basilica, down in what's called now Nolita, north of Little Italy.
And I thought it was Soho, or what do they call it?
They've been refining them more.
Now we're north of Little Italy.
Push the real estate values up, they give them little world.
When I went to NYU, it was Soho.
At St. Patrick's new cathedral, which of course Hughes started building, and McCloskey helped to finish, and Corrigan put some touches on. He was the third archbishop. And so it's been a remarkable Irish gig.
And how did this become the preeminent see in the United States? I mean, Baltimore was the first. You would think that's where the energy and power would be. It's not. It's in New York.
The first red hat in the United States went to New York, to McCloskey. I think St. John Paul said it best when he said New York is the capital of the world.
It's true.
And remember, if you take Hughes, for instance, when they were burning down churches in Philadelphia, and the nativist anti-Catholics were coming to New York, he basically told the nativist mayor of New York, if you burn down one church in New York like Philly, this place will look like Moscow 1812 when Napoleon left Moscow. So he was a great bomb thrower. But what we found in putting this book together is each archbishop, personality is different, sort of perfectly fit their times. Hughes is a bomb thrower. He leaves the place pretty much broke, but did remarkable stuff in his time. McCloskey, more low-key, started rebuilding the archdiocese finances. We saw that Spellman versus Cook in the 60s, and O'Connor versus Egan. And so O'Connor was a great bomb thrower like Hughes. Egan based his administration on McCloskey. He goes, you got to regroup here, inherited a deficit, a lot of debt, and he sort of fixed the place and was criticized for not being that public a person, but he had a job to fix the archdiocese. And while O'Connor was out there picking fights all the time, good fights, and won many of them.
Yeah, let's very quickly talk about some of these men, because you give them nicknames in the book. You call John O'Connor, Cardinal O'Connor, the Admiral.
Well, it makes sense because he spent 28 years, was it? In the Navy, and was a rear admiral when he left.
And ran the place like an admiral.
Well, that's right.
Ran the place.
That's right.
A lot of people felt they were swabbies.
Everybody was a swabby on that ship. But he was an amazing man. I mean, I remember Cardinal O'Connor. He would engage publicly, and he was unafraid to sort of step out into the middle of the culture and take it on.
I'll read one quote. He arrives in New York in '84, and here was the opening salvo. Quote, I don't see how any Catholic in good conscience can vote for an individual expressing himself or herself as favoring abortion. Mario Cuomo went nuts, Teddy Kennedy went nuts, Geraldine Ferraro went nuts, the New York Times went nuts, and that was the beginning of the battle. But what's interesting, I had a front row seat in all this, and I met Mario Cuomo in 1970 when he was a Queens Boulevard lawyer. I've known the son since he's 17 years old. But when you look at and connect all the dots, as smart as Mario was, you got to remember there was a time in the early 70s when he was pro-life, etc. Then when he lost a few elections, he flipped. He takes on O'Connor. As smart as Mario was, O'Connor beat him at every turn, and it just comes out in this book here. Because when Mario did one of his dances about who's going to go to parishes, who can decide, who really decides what the faith means, what's this and that, O'Connor said, I do. And he shut Mario right down.
That was the end. You call Cardinal Egan the realist. Now, Cardinal Egan had a tense relationship with a lot of the priests in New York. The people, he wasn't kind of warm, sweet, happy figure. He wasn't quite the TV personality that Cardinal O'Connor was. Why do you call him the realist?
Well, for the very reason that he saw to it that difficulties financially, particularly in the archdiocese, were dealt with.
Right.
He was a guy who dealt with problems. He dealt with them vigorously and expertly. And so he did not have fantasies about his role as a public figure. He was a hard-working, no-nonsense guy.
Since St. Patrick's Day is upon us, George, and you know this subject intimately, Cardinal Dolan, whom in the book you call the evangelist, got himself into some trouble a few years ago when he allowed NBC Out, which is a gay group, to march in the parade. The first time that happened after the Supreme Court ruled this is a religious gathering, so there's no legal compulsion to do it, yet he admitted them. You had a conversation with Cardinal Egan, which you quote in the book. Tell me about that, his view of this, and what is the legacy here?
Well, keep in mind, when it was under the Hibernians, that's when the courts ruled under O'Connor that it was a procession, a religious procession. O'Connor was interviewed by the judge. The management of the parade changed. So there's that fine line where you could say it's now a Irish day of expressing nationality, ethnicity, or something along those lines. That's the fine line.
Green beer.
Green beer. There was great pressure from the sponsors like Guinness. There was great pressure from NBC. I happened to be with Cardinal Egan that day, and he didn't know about it yet because I walked in his apartment. He lived on the east side of Manhattan. And I said, what do you think? He said, what do you think about this? And I told him he was not a happy guy because he looked at me and said, listen, I tell NBC, thanks for your service, but WPIX, Channel 11 will hold it. So he generally, the past in retirement, announced the Grand Marshal. He canceled that day and didn't go. So he was not a happy camper about the entire thing.
Go ahead.
The court had ruled in '93 that it is a religious procession, in part because of the charter of the Ancient Order of Hibernians, which is a Catholic organization, very specifically Catholic. They place upon their members certain responsibilities with regard to the faith, going to confession during Holy Week, various other things. So it was plausible at that point in '93 for the court to rule that because it was a Catholic religious procession, there could be Catholic rules pertaining to who marched and under what banners. Now that that's changed, there's a certain realpolitik about Cardinal Dolan's decision to go ahead and be Grand Marshal. And it wasn't his decision to admit this group out at NBC Universal.
But he agreed to be Grand Marshal in the parade, which seemed to give his blessing to the whole.
We did a piece in the Catholic thing that we titled at the time, The Ad Hoc Moral Theology of Cardinal Dolan.
He couldn't have liked that too much.
I'm sure he didn't. But I also think that, say this about him. He's a big-hearted man.
Yeah, no, he's a kind, and everybody wants to be near. I was just in New York at Mass, and it's amazing. After Mass, you see all the people crowd up the side of, St. Pat's, wanting to get close to him, say hi. He's
that kind of guy. And also,
figure.
not only did he open the archives to us, we spent hours interviewing him. So he was very open.
Very generous.
What do you think his legacy will be in comparison to all the other men that you chronicle at great depth? And the stories here are really worth reading, fascinating, some I'd never heard before.
The difference is this. The Archbishop of New York doesn't have the political clout that a Hughes had or a Spellman had. What has changed, however, is they still have moral authority. So when the mayor of New York, de Blasio, was in a fix with the Gardner guy being killed by the cops in Staten Island, or had a heart attack if the cops locked him up, he turned to the cardinal. They had a meeting at his mansion. They had a prayer session at St. Patrick's to bring peace. Same thing happened with O'Connor. Even back in the 60s, Cook was brought in by the mayor to try to bring peace during the riots. So there is that moral authority, and when politicians get in a fix, and you had to see him at St. Patrick, I have the great privilege of being in the front row at St. Patrick's. You caught me on your show.
That's right.
And the politicians behind me who fought to get in there, you wouldn't believe these beauties who haven't seen the inside of a church since maybe the previous pope was there. Chuck Schumer, everybody fought to get in there. So there's a hypocrisy here on their part, but when they're in a fix and need moral authority to speak out, they still turn to the Archbishop of New York. They don't turn to the Episcopal Bishop of New York. They turn to the Roman Catholic Archbishop.
But George said that the Cardinal Archbishop now doesn't have the political authority he once had. If you have the people, you still have political authority, yes?
Yes, but back in the day, right up through probably Cardinal O'Connor, certainly under most of the rest of the Cardinal Archbishops of New York, there were a lot of believing Catholics. Part of the reason that Cardinal Dolan has had to shut down some churches and consolidate others is because a great many Catholics have followed the diaspora into the suburbs. So you just don't have the power base that they once did.
Yeah, very good. Well, it's a fascinating history, and we'll see what this portends for the future. George Marlin, Brad Miner, thank you both for being here. Their book, Sons of St. Patrick, A History of the Archbishops of New York, From Dagger John to Timmytown is available now at bookstores everywhere, online, and at EWTN's religious catalog at EWTNRC.com. Well, that's all the time we have for now. Until next week, the show continues on Facebook and Twitter. Like me on Facebook, follow me on Twitter. The links and my tour schedule are at RaymondArroyo.com. And be sure to join us next week. We'll remember Mother Angelica on the first anniversary of her passing. Until then, we'll be scouting the world over for all that is seen and unseen. On behalf of the staff and crew of EWTN News, thank you for watching. I'm Raymond Arroyo from Washington, D.C. Bye now.